Chapter 341, A Temporary Truce. Brother Assist's shock was nothing compared to Sword Demon's excitement, as his eyes literally lit up when he heard this. "Are you for real? It's just a rumor," Deep Waters replied, and everybody settled down. "That's wonderful." It was rare for Sword Demon to get so excited. In actuality, Parallel World was an extremely challenging affair for the heavy smokers out there. Plenty of players looking melancholic and irate were entirely due to their addiction to smoking, which the MMO had been unable to help stem. This sort of suffering was something non-smokers would never understand. Not smoking for 24 hours straight was a lot harder for Sword Demon than grinding on monsters for 24 hours straight. His old IGN smoking addict was not just for show. Rumors had it that 2 pounds of cigarette ash could be found in the keyboard he often used, and that was only the ash that accidentally fell between the crevices. Actually, a big reason why the all-powerful Sword Demon in other MMOs was looking more sullen in Parallel World was precisely because this craving of his could not be fulfilled. Give me a cigarette was already an unattainable dream for Sword Demon, so anyone could imagine just how huge this news that Deep Waters had shared with him was. "I'll help you ask around," Brother Assist told Sword Demon. Sword Demon nodded his head vigorously. With this topic concluded as well as the introduction and small talk out of the way, Deep Waters took his identity as a local seriously and asked with a wave of his hand, "Gentlemen, what are your plans for tonight?" The mercenaries looked at one another before answering. "This city seems to be more dangerous than Y City, so we think it's better to keep a low profile. Let me would give you all a casual tour around the city, then this way, when someone asks you guys what Linian City is like, you will at least have something good to say about this place," Deep Waters offered. "Is there a need for this? They clearly had no interest in sightseeing. You guys have nothing to do anyway, right?" Deep Waters chuckled before asking this. "Why don't we go erase our park value?" Royal God Call suggested. He had originally wanted to do some questing, but the first quest he had come across needed him to head into the jungle and look for a certain NPC there. As such, Royal God Call unhesitatingly abandoned the said quest. Arriving at a foreign city like this, for someone who would even lose his way when walking down the main avenue in a city, it would probably take him a lifetime to find his way out if he were to wander in the jungle by himself. This suggestion caused Deep Waters' eyebrow to twitch. These mercenaries' park value was undoubtedly earned at the expense of his guildmates' lives. Deep Waters knew that these experts before him were the reason why his guild had incurred quite a heavy loss this time around. That drifting fellow also killed quite a handful by himself. Deep Waters had previously received intel about a female thief with superb killing prowess. He had no idea on who it was at first, but after that earlier incident at the spawn point, he now knew that the female thief who had torn into his guild like wet paper was none other than the top-level player in Parallel World, Svelte Dancer. "What do you guys think? Let's go do it." "Since Deep Waters is offering to tour us, he can lead the way for us," Royal God Call suggested in earnest. "Aren't you the only one who needs someone to lead the way?" Young Master Han had already seen through Royal God Call's intention. Given how directionally challenged he was, how would he manage to do something like bounty mission in a city he was unfamiliar with when it required him to know how to read coordinates? As such, he was trying to get Deep Waters to guide him, a truly crafty request, indeed. "This guy here is helpless when it comes to directions," Sword Demon explained Royal God Call's dilemma to Deep Waters. "Royal doing this sort of mission alone will only end with him getting lost, instead. But you all can't possibly pick the same target for the bounty mission," Deep Waters exclaimed. "You don't need to guide all of us. Just help a Royal out. We can easily manage on our own," Sword Demon and the rest said. With this discussion settled, everyone readied their gear and then set off. Only young Master Han remained seated. "What about you?" Deep Waters cast him a sidelong glance. He was aware of this man's quirks and knew for certain that young Master Han did not have a park point to his name. Standing up, young Master Han answered, "I'm going to discuss how to take care of your damn guild tomorrow." Deep Waters' eyes shone when he heard this, but young Master Han's next words effectively put a stop to his budding plan. "Don't bother sending thieves to follow me." "Look." Young Master Han brought 2 pouches up Deep Waters' eye level. Deep Waters naturally recognized those pouches to be the same as what the players of Linian City used to store a whitestone dust. "I've bought 2 pouches of that dust while strolling along the streets. I'd recommend you guys to do the same," young Master Han said. Deep Waters was speechless. There was indeed such a business thriving in Linian City. After all, not every player was willing or even diligent enough to make the long trip between the 2 cities just for the whitestone dust. Therefore, with this sort of thinking, some players sold this item to the locals. Realistically, players would not earn much from such transactions, so mainly the poor newbies would sell this stuff. These men chatted until the tavern entrance and then split up, with young Master Han walking off alone, while Deep Waters brought the others over to Linian City's bounty assignment hall. This was Brother Assist's first time doing bounty mission, so he was the most excited among these men. Knights and priests were merely support job classes before level 40. Upon reaching level 40, they could choose between the 2 paths of light and darkness. The priest job class possibly had the most diverging paths as far as job class advancement went. Holy Knights would continue to focus on blessings and even gaining access to some healing spells from the priest job class. This was also when they would gain access to the highly anticipated group buff, Party Ride skill. As for the other job classes, they could only learn a few basic tactical skills. Meanwhile, the Dark Knights would go down the path of slaughter. Instead of blessings, this job class's skills would be filled with death and malice, allowing players who advanced into this to become a proper combat job class. Having chosen to be a Dark Knight, Brother Assist would no longer have to hang back in every fight they came across. The recent large-scale battle they just participated in Linian City was the first time Brother Assist had tainted himself with park points. Although this was an entirely violent event, since it was his first time killing another player, Brother Assist considered it as a wonderful experience. Right now, he could not help but be a little excited at the prospect of doing bounty mission. When they arrived at a certain corner of the street, Deep Waters suddenly halted his steps. Straining his neck and peeking over a wall, he then raised his hand and pointed to a direction. "It's over there." The man looked at the direction he was pointing and saw a huge hall about 500 meters away. Based on his action, Deep Waters did not seem to have any intention of accompanying them directly to it. "So there it is. Let's go." These men urged Deep Waters to hurry. "You guys go there by yourselves. I'll just wait here for your return," Deep Waters told them. "What's the matter?" The 4 men were perplexed. "Right now, it's a little inappropriate for me to be seen with you guys. It's best if I don't show up." "You guys should be careful yourselves," Deep Waters warned. "What's the matter?" The 4 men were even more confused. "There's our quest, right?" Deep Waters laughed bitterly. The 4 of them instantly realized what he meant. After such a huge battle, many players involved in it should have accumulated park value. Everyone would be striving to clear off this park value with the battle on hold. Who knew when the next engagement would occur? Therefore, clearing their park value now would at least lessen the burden if or when the fighting resumed. At this time, Deep Waters was currently the commander of one of the parties involved. Assisting the enemies to erase their park value would make it awkward for either party involved. Although Deep Waters had made it clear that his connection to Sword Demon and young Master Han would not come into play, this only made it more inappropriate for them to be seen together. If the Linian City's players saw their boss helping the enemies, they would surely feel discontented with him. If it was Yunjuan City's players who saw young Master's elite receiving aid from the enemy commander, given how Oathless Sword and his men were treating them, such an act would only deepen their suspicions over their loyalty. While young Master's elite might have a clear conscience about this and did not really care about Oathless Sword and the others' opinion, Deep Waters was the leader of his guild, and that position of power meant that he could not treat this matter lightly. Thus, he made the conscious decision of stopping 500 meters away from the bounty assignment hall and letting them pick up their bounties alone. "It's only 500 meters. You can't possibly lose your way, right?" Deep Waters smiled as he said this to Royal God Call. "I should be fine." "No problem." Royal God Call stared fixedly at the bounty assignment hall 500 meters in front of him. He was still not 100% certain that he would not get lost despite having the place in his line of sight. "Hey, you're not going there alone. We'll be going with you to pick up our bounties, too." Waving his hand toward Deep Waters, Sword Demon dragged Royal Godcall toward the bounty assignment hall with the others. "I'll be waiting." Deep Waters shrunk back to a corner of the wall and leaned on it. He seemed to be in deep thought. Suddenly, his shoulders seized up and he distanced himself from the base of the wall as though he had been seized and tossed away from it. It was unknown when his hand got a hold of a pouch of white stone dust, but he scattered a handful of it in the next instant. A red figure appeared behind him, but before Deep Waters could make out the entire person, the figure disappeared once more. "Why is it you again?" Deep Waters spat. Plenty of players were walking on the street, and when they saw Deep Waters leap and shout while tossing out a handful of white stone dust, they instantly realized what was happening. A thief in stealth was over in that corner. Everyone vigilantly eyed that particular corner of the street, with a few even preparing to flee at any moment's notice. Someone quickly rushed to Deep Waters' side and warily asked, "What's going on?" Deep Waters recognized this man as someone from his guild. Dragging him to a side, he was about to explain the situation to the person when the red figure that was now covered with white stone dust once more appeared and dashed toward them at an unbelievable speed. Before the man could react, the rushing figure was already next to him. In the following moment, the man was turned into a beam of white light by the figure's attack that he had been unable to defend himself against. Of course, the person who had appeared was none other than Svelte Dancer. She kept her dagger, swept her gaze over to Deep Waters, and said derisively, "What are you crying out for? It's not like you're my target here." Deep Waters' mouth hung agape. He had indeed thought Svelte Dancer was targeting him, so he had evaded so nimbly and had not considered warning his comrade of a looming danger. Sadly, it was already too late to say anything to the man by the time Deep Waters wised up on Svelte Dancer's real target. Watching his comrade get eliminated by another, Deep Waters would naturally not just stand there without doing anything. However, before he could strike, he saw Svelte Dancer engulf herself in a white glow and disappear in an instant. Deep Waters was dumbfounded, impressed over the #1 pay-to-win player's willingness of using a teleportation scroll without a moment's hesitation. Chapter 342, The Undercurrent Beneath the Piece. Deep Waters was indeed a player who had been to many places, as he was able to tell with a glance that the white light that had engulfed Svelte Dancer was from her use of a teleportation skill. A country bumpkin would have thought it was her dying or getting forcefully disconnected. Moreover, mainly players from Y City would know of the existence of Windchaser's emblem, an item akin to a product only available to select people or circle. Not knowing where Svelte Dancers had gone to, Deep Waters hurriedly sent his guildmate, who had just been killed off, a message expressing his condolence, only to receive "The user is no longer in a serviceable area. System notification." The man was evidently still online, so there could only be one reason why he could not be contacted: he was serving time in prison. Deep Waters quickly deduced that Svelte Dancer was probably doing bounty mission as well. Initially, he had thought that she was randomly killing his guildmates in the city. Now, he felt that it was more logical to assume that she was doing bounty mission. If someone was really going around and rampantly killing his men, the guild channel would long explode into a flurry of activities. Seeing that everything was as quiet as ever and no one was reporting anything, it could only be said that those who had been killed off were sent straight to prison. With that being the case, it would truly be impossible for them to inform the rest about their plight. Seems that many are spending their time in prison today, Deep Waters thought to himself. The players who had collaterally been apprehended by the guards pursuing Goofy were also sent to prison, so who knew how many tables of mahjong were formed by those stuck in prison right now? Deep Waters found it comical when he thought about this that way. However, his expression quickly turned sour when he realized something. These players who are currently squatting in jail, especially those who had park value of over 20 points, would be stuck there for the next 2 days or so, and that was on the premise that they would not log off while doing time. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation dictated that it was implausible. Just the boredom of being stuck in prison for 24 hours would make many of them divide their prison time into several hours in a week. As for those who were required to spend 48 hours in prison, being imprisoned for long hours would normally not be detrimental to anyone besides the person themselves, but since their guild was currently at war with another force, Losing a good chunk of manpower was truly disastrous for them. A swathe of players in his guild had earned themselves park points from today's battle. Those who only had a few park points could be ignored, but those who had rather high park value could not. After all, they would have to be in jail for several hours. Deep Waters reckoned at least several dozens of players had park value of 5 points and above, and most of them were probably mages. The guild was very well versed with group PvP. Using traps to restrict their enemies in the jungle, they would then utilize sneak attacks to harass and deploy their mages to obliterate. In the city, archers' arrows would suppress the enemies and mages would obliterate. No matter which way one looked at this, mages were the deciding factor to close out their assaults. As for their hunters, they were only good at firing sneaky shots from their hiding spots. And regarding the imposing arrow formation of Yunjuan cities traversing 4 seas, Linian City was just not the right environment to practice something that focused on positioning and arrangement. With how this city's streets varied in width, there was a limit to the number of players that they could field in a street fight. The full extent of their firepower would at most include the first 3 or 4 rows of archers in front that had direct vision of the enemies, and everyone else would have to fire arrows and arcs. This particular move was something new that they had learned from traversing 4 seas sharpshooters today. In fact, their execution of it was a mess, and some of them even almost shot down their mages on the rooftops by accident. Doing a rough calculation of the eventual clash, the combat might of Deepwater's guild would depend on a street's width. Most likely, their guild with over 300 archers could only field about 30 to 50 players to deal damage to the enemies. The only upside that Deepwaters could think of regarding this was how they could quickly replace their vanguard with the second row of players. They would merely last longer in a battle of attrition and have a more significant snipe efficacy. With many of their mages sent to prison, it was likely that in their fight later with the enemies, Deepwater's guild would lose plenty of its artillery battery. Therefore, it was really hard to imagine how they would fare in that upcoming clash with just their hunters' messy shots and without their mages' highly efficient firepower. The more Deepwaters thought of this, the more worried he became. Yunjuan City's players' act of erasing their park points no longer seemed to just be affecting the individuals involved, as it was possible for many of his men to find themselves in prison if they did not quickly clear off their park value. This was a very heavy loss. With that in mind, Deepwaters hurriedly sent out a message on the guild channel requesting those who were still online to quickly help their mages erase the park value to their names. "Why is it suddenly so urgent?" the guild members asked. "It's very important to be quick about this," Deepwaters replied. "But I was just about to." Many of them started to give all sorts of excuses, such as being busy grinding, questing, or even bringing a lady around to sightsee. Some even claimed to be heading to Beishi City to collect more white stone dust after depleting their stock in that last engagement. Deepwaters was on the verge of breaking down as he shouted, "Don't you all understand? Many players from Yunjuan City are doing bounty mission at this moment, and the players on top of the wanted players list are mostly our men. So each of them is being sent directly to prison." Everyone quickly understood the severity of the situation, and the ensuing discussion was something even Deepwaters had not thought of. "These guys can pick up our bounties, but we can't do the same to them." "Why's that?" "Don't you know the rules governing the wanted players list? If none of them registered their account in Linian City, we would have to head to the overall wanted players list and pick them up. How are we gonna know which of them are the ones we're supposed to target?" someone asked. "Haven't they registered their accounts in Linian City yet?" This question floated in Deepwater's mind. Did the enemies register their accounts in Linian City yet? Conventional logic dictated that they must have done that. Otherwise, they would be really inconvenienced if anything untoward happened. However, at the moment, there were plenty of underlying connotations to this question. If the enemies were doing bounty mission without registered first, it was likely they had done so intentionally. This also meant that the current situation was not purely coincidental when one considered the sequence of events that had occurred. Rather, this might be an entirely sinister ploy that the enemies had set into motion. If this was the case, it would be truly frightening, as they would be doing their utmost to send as many of Deepwater's guildmates into prison before withdrawing prisoner Todd from it and subsequently leaving from Linian City. Such a plan would truly be cunning and devious. Deepwater's actually had a pretty good grasp of Oathless Sword and his army's movement. He knew that their side had already put Todd into prison for safekeeping for the night. In fact, this was the main reason for both parties' temporary truce. With the target not around, leading his men to completely wipe out Yunjuan City's players would be useless. The enemies could easily leave the city now that it was over and leave the quest target Todd still locked up in prison. Since Deepwaters had no permission or means to retrieve the NPC, this would essentially end in quest failure for both parties. Hence, Deepwaters had called for the immediate cessation of attacks on Yunjuan City's players after prisoner Todd had been brought behind the safety of Linian City's prison. However, by the looks of things, the battle had yet to stop, as the enemies were perhaps utilizing this system rule to secretly enact their plan against Deepwater's guild. This particular plan that Yunjuan City's players were enacting had actually relegated Deepwaters and his guildmates into a passive role. As long as the enemies did not register their accounts to the city, they would have no way of retaliating to them. It was truly a pity that most of his guildmates bearing high park value were mages that also happened to be disadvantageous at 1 versus 1 PvP. A whole host of reasons and factors made Deepwaters believe that they were in deep shit, yet all he could do was to hurry his men on the guild channel. Lending the guild's mages a hand to clear their park value was the key to solving this situation, and more importantly, it would protect their mages from being hunted. Deepwaters carefully picked out 5 mages and messaged them, but his face turned ashen when he discovered that 2 out of the 5 were already in a non-serviceable region. As for the remaining 3, one had a park value of 1 point, another had none, and the other had a park value of 7 points. This last person was currently frantically calling for people to come to his aid. Mages with park value above 3 points, report your coordinates and find the nearest comrade. The more the merrier. Head over to the bounty assignment hall together once you're done. Deepwaters arranged this as he walked toward the bounty assignment hall. He saw Sword Demon's group happily entering the hall and felt Dancer quickly bounding out of it. He even saw quite a few familiar faces from today's battle. He also saw Drifting, who was waving toward him in greeting. Deepwaters headed over to him. Drifting and one of his companions had just walked out of the bounty assignment hall. You look busy. Where's Left Hand? Deepwaters asked. Drifting's 2 companions were Left Hand of Love and Right Hand of Cool. Whoever heard their names would never ever forget them. I'm Left Hand of Love. The fighter beside Drifting answered with obvious discontent. Oh, where's Right Hand, then? Deepwaters asked. He might have a deep impression of the 2 men, but he could not really differentiate between them. You guys killed him, Drifting answered. Ahem, quest. It's the quest, Deepwaters explained sheepishly. I know. Drifting chuckled as he said, we're about to do quests, as well. Hold up. Deepwaters had let them pass in the end, as the question he had wanted to ask remained stuck in his throat. This was when Sword Demon and the others came out of the bounty assignment hall after obtaining their bounties. The 4 were still chatting and laughing, not caring for the world or anyone beside them, when they found Deepwaters right outside the entrance to their surprise. Why are you here? The 4 men began looking all around them warily. I've got something on, so I won't be able to accompany you guys. Deepwaters said, instead. Oh, you're busy. 3 men stated, as the last man, Royal God Call, looked visibly distraught. Then, who's gonna lead me around? Sword Demon kindly passed his Windchaser's emblem to Royal God Call. This should at least ease half of your burden. Thank you. The pale-faced Royal God Call took it and began his journey. Do what you have to do, then. The other 3 men bid Deepwaters farewell before each leaving separately. Deepwaters really wanted an answer to the question boggling his mind, yet it was truly not an easy question to ask. As such, he could only do his best to read everyone's expression and reaction to find out whether there was really an underlying plan to this. However, if this was indeed a plan that person had hatched up, it was highly probable for these men to be clueless about their role in it. This would be absolutely in line with how that despicable man did things. Should I catch the ball before the bound? These 4 men were surely apex experts of Yunjuan City, and there was still drifting. He could still make out his figure in the distance. These 5 experts were heading in different directions, and all their backs were facing him right now. His comrades were already on their way as well. Should he take this chance to launch a sneak attack on them? Deepwaters clenched his fists so much so that the white of his knuckles could be seen. Right now, his guildmates already spotted him and were all now gazing at him. Chapter 343, A Tragedy. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Sword Demon and the others were walking further and further away from the bounty assignment hall. Deepwater's mind was in turmoil as his inner demon and angel vied for control. In the end, he was just not merciless enough to order an ambush on these 5 experts. It's still up for debate whether these men are clearing their park value for themselves or if there is an underlying plot involved, Deepwaters told himself. Although he felt that his actions were not daring and resolute enough, this was only because the quest required him to cross swords with his friends. Such an event was something he was also unhappy about. Thus, Deepwaters did not say a word while all his guildmates had their eyes on him. 4 out of the 5 mercenaries turned a corner and disappeared from their line of sight, leaving just Royal Godcall alone by the intersection. Walking to the left for a few steps before turning back right for several more, Royal Godcall took out his booklet to record something. Royal Godcall's pale face betrayed his fear. This was Royal Godcall's most pitiful moment. Deepwaters could no longer bear the sight and turned to look at his guildmates. Instead, "What are you guys looking at? Go clear out your park points if you've still got them." The players exchanged glances as they asked each other, "Do you have any?" Several of them stepped out, but their park value was only at 1 or 2 points, so they were not in a hurry to clear them. They figured their park points would gradually disappear after staying up tonight and did not see the point of risking their lives doing bounty mission. "Don't tell me that those with high park value have already been sent to prison," Deepwaters anxiously thought as he started assigning players to help clear off the park points of those who had them. Players who went in to pick up bounties told Deepwaters, "It seems that they've not registered their accounts in Linian City yet, since the top bounty on the wanted players list doesn't have high park value. Logically speaking, it's unlikely that they will have that low." Deepwaters refuted this. "They did not attempt to wipe us out in a wave like we did, so their park value won't be so concentrated. Besides, our losses are just not as heavy as theirs." Deepwater's comrades readily accepted his assessment. "How many men did we lose tonight? Anyone with a detailed breakdown?" Deepwaters asked. "Over 100 of us lost levels." "Only over 100? So little?" Deepwaters was shocked. This was when the players curiously stared at Deepwaters. "Of course, it's their fault for bringing a bunch of mercenaries, too. Otherwise, why would we have players dropping by a whole level?" "Oh!" Deepwaters exclaimed. He then hit his head in deep regret. In competitive quests, guild members directly associated with the quests would not accrue park points when they clashed with one another, and their deaths would only result in a 20% experience loss. When they first obtained this quest, not one of them knew that it was a competitive quest and only learned of this fact when they saw the players from Yunjuan City with their target. That was when Deepwaters and his men added 2 and 2 together and thought of the rules governing such quests. Somehow, he had forgotten about all this. This was probably because he had become the first casualty on their side, and his experience loss from that death was exceptionally high. Deepwaters was instantly in tears when he thought of this. He felt very foolish now for actually being grateful to Gufei insta-killing him earlier. Recalling Oathless Sword's anger due to his teasing, Deepwaters was certain that the man's tolerance must have been at its very limit. Deepwaters was very moved when the mage seized that opportunity to swiftly execute him. In retrospect, however, "Fuck your ancestors!" Deepwaters bellowed and beat his chest in anguish right by the bounty assignment hall's entrance. He would have only lost 20% of his experience had he died under Ruthless Sword's torture. Instead, Deepwaters had lost about 195% of his experience thanks to Gufei's interference, making his loss almost 10 times more than what it could have been. He felt really agonized by how unlucky he was. For him to have completely forgotten about the rule, had that guy also forgotten about it? Thinking back to that situation earlier, Deepwaters felt that he had already found the answer. Coincidentally, right by the corner of the street ahead, Oathless Sword and the remaining mercenary leaders emerged and walked toward his direction. When these men saw Deepwaters and his men, they were all very shocked. Deepwaters did not spare a moment of thought and just rushed toward them with his guildmates in tow. Oathless Sword, who was walking at the front of the group, naturally blanched in surprise. The enemies currently held numerical superiority over them. And while these people around him were his to command, without any underlings to do their bidding. Moreover, as a warrior, he could not escape even if he wanted to. Their enemies should not attack them at their current state. That was the conclusion that they had come to in their just concluded short discussion. Did they make a mistake in their judgment? Were their enemies foolish that they did not realize this fact? Thinking of this, Oathless Sword hurriedly barked out a reminder. You dare attack us? Do you not want us to retrieve your target from the prison or something? Deepwaters did not even look at him, though, and only raised a finger toward his direction. I'm not looking for you. Go where you want and stay there for all I care. Oathless Sword was incensed, but what could he say to that? This man had brought over 100 players. He could only blame himself for not bringing his men with him as well. What a huge misstep on his part. Deepwaters walked up to them and quickly dragged young Master Han to one side. Looking backward and seeing his men following him closely, he hurriedly cried out, "What are you still following me for? Go and clean your rap sheet already." Everyone was stunned, and someone awkwardly asked, "Are we not killing them?" As he pointed to Oathless Sword and the other mercenary leaders that they had already surrounded. "Kill them, my ass. What's our quest? What use is there to killing them now? Go and do what you're supposed to do." Deepwaters dismissed his men before cursing young Master Han, "You're a jerk." Young Master Han rolled his eyes before turning to address Yunjuan City's dumbfounded leaders, "You guys go ahead without me. I'll be there in a while, I just need to speak with his madman first." Although they were curious on what the two would talk about, standing by the side to eavesdrop was just really embarrassing, so they could only take their leave. "Did you suggest all this, you jerk?" Deepwaters immediately started lambasting young Master Han once the audience from both sides left. "What did I suggest?" Young Master Han asked innocently. "Drop the act." Young Master Han continued to shrug with that innocent expression on his face, though. Thus, Deepwaters could only narrate the tragedy that had befallen him in a tone of disgust, concluding, "You're the only capable of coming up with such a despicable act. He. So that's what this is about." Young Master Han chuckled warmly. "What's so funny?" Deepwaters raged. "Honestly speaking, I have nothing to do with that. He only did that out of kindness. I dare say that he probably doesn't know anything about the particular rule's existence. Even if he did, I'm sure he did not think of that, either." "That guy's a total gaming noob," young Master Han said. "Gaming noob? Stop pulling my leg." Deepwaters did not dare believe it. A gaming noob captured him alive. A gaming noob nearly single-handedly disrupted his street ambush. How was he going to live this down if word got out about it? He really is a noob. This game mode just happens to suit him, young Master Han insisted. "What do you mean?" Deepwaters asked. "He claims he's proficient in Kung Fu," young Master Han replied. "Kung Fu? Are there still people out there dabbling in that kind of stuff?" Deepwaters was skeptical. Young Master Han shrugged once more. "I don't know, but his skill is no joke. But besides that, his knowledge regarding MMOs is nearly non-existent. Where did such an abnormality come from?" Deepwaters muttered to himself, unaware that he had already released young Master Han. "I'm really sorry about today." Young Master Han tidied his clothes before saying, "Whoa, did I mishear you? Are you even someone capable of apologizing?" Deepwaters reacted as though he had just witnessed the most frightening thing. "This apology is for offending you more afterward," young Master Han calmly said. Deepwaters instantly became wary. "Did you come up with a devious plan to counter our scheme? Take a guess." Young Master Han smiled warmly. "I've decided to silence you," Deepwaters suddenly said. "That's not your style." Young Master Han patted him on his shoulders. "I'm leaving. Sit tight and wait for your death." Deepwaters clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Against this bad person, there was absolutely no need to be merciful. He should start with double shot from this angle, follow it up with snipe, then power shot, and finally homing projectile to kill this bastard. Deepwaters was a man who was quick to repay gratitude and swift to exact vengeance. Suddenly, He sped up and dove toward young Master Han. Young Master Han turned to look backward when he heard a hurried footsteps behind him and was shocked to see Deep Waters rushing toward him so aggressively. "What are you?" "There are thieves." Deep Waters conveyed with as few words as he could. At the very same moment he dashed toward young Master Han. He released a handful of white stone dust toward the right of young Master Han. He used plenty of white stone dust with this toss, effectively interrupting the two thieves who were now caught in a fit of cough. "Dodge quickly." By the time Deep Waters shouted this, young Master Han had already stepped to the side at the sight of the thieves. "Are they not your men?" Young Master Han could not think of anyone else besides Deep Waters and his guild that would go against or even plan to attack traversing four seas and the others in this foreign city. "What nonsense," Deep Waters said dismissively. These two thieves did not seem to be strangers to the white stone dust. After waving their hands to disperse the cloud of dust that had formed, the two of them tightly gripped their daggers and gave chase with fleet foot. Into the jungle. Deep Waters shouted to young Master Han as he fired off an arrow. This shot he fired differed from the usual shots archers would fire, as he was not aiming for the enemy's face but was instead targeting the sole of his foot. A clanking sound could be heard when the arrow connected, as a trap sprang forth from the ground and bit down on the player's ankle. "Snare shot." "Bet you haven't seen anything like that before, eh?" Deep Waters savored the thief's expression of shock as he said this. He then turned to fire an arrow toward the other thief. This man had quite the agile reaction, instantly halting his steps when he saw an arrow fly toward him. In the end, that fired off arrow was just a normal one that embedded itself in front of his foot. The man leapt to the side for fear of the arrow suddenly turning into a trap and snaring him. Deep Waters, who had already distanced himself by a few meters, sniggered when he turned back and saw the man's look of panic. Chapter 344, On Backyard. Deep Waters faced forward once more and saw that young Master Han had already run into the jungle, clearly making the move before being reminded by him. "That jerk, he's really quick on the uptake." Deep Waters mumbled under his breath as he chased over. The two thieves behind him were only momentarily stunned by the trap he had fired off. In fact, one of them was only hoodwinked and was not even ensnared. As for the other man, his leg that got trapped was already freed from it. Evidently, the duration of the trap for Deep Waters' snare shot did not last very long. Several steps inside the jungle, Deep Waters spotted young Master Han leaning hard against a tree. He dove behind another tree as he whispered, "They're here. There are only two of them, can't you take care of them?" Young Master Han asked. It was natural for a priest like him to have difficulty contending with others, but Deep Waters was considered as one of the 5 unyielding experts. Even if he lost a level after Gu Fei had slain him, others would deride him if he could not even take care of 2 thieves. "It's not just 2. Deep Waters explained. "Who are they?" Young Master Han asked. "Fuck, how would I know? They're obviously after you." Deep Waters exclaimed. "Isn't this your backyard? I don't recognize them." "Haven't seen them before as well," Deep Waters replied. "Have they caught up yet?" "Of course." Deep Waters suddenly turned and circled round the other direction as he fired 2 arrows with double shot. "Damn it!" A voice from within the jungle growled. It clearly belonged to a man who had gotten struck by the arrows. Deep Waters ducked behind the tree once more as he quickly peeked out from the other side and took another shot. Not a curse was heard this time. Deep Waters leaned close to the tree as his ears pricked to pick up any sound but did not hear even a footstep. At the moment, both parties were rather close to one another. The jungle floor was filled with detritus, so it was not easy for anyone to walk through it without making a sound. It was obvious that the enemies had stopped moving for now. Young Master Han gestured for Deep Waters to provide him intel on the number of enemies that they were facing. Deep Waters lifted 4 fingers. He had caught sight of 5 players running into the jungle the moment he peeked out, but the 2 arrows he had fired off targeted only 1 player. Therefore, one of them was already taken care of. One thing he was certain was that the enemies had already noted his position and were most likely preparing to conduct a sneak attack on him. Peep, the hunter's skill he had was specially used to counter stealth. However, he could only sense the players when they were in stealth. The enemies right now were not using stealth and were instead just carefully closing in on him, so the skill was essentially useless. Deep Waters made a quick gesture to young Master Han and the latter nodded tacitly. Counting to 3 in his heart, Young Master Han suddenly revealed himself from behind the tree and used the priest's weak holy ball to attack one of the enemies. Although no one would treat a priest's attack seriously, his sudden appearance nevertheless attracted everyone's attention. Deep Waters took this chance to instantly bound out and hide himself behind another tree. The enemies did not know that their momentary shift of attention had been exploited by Deep Waters. Deep Waters had already changed his position by the time they turned to look at the tree he had been hiding before young Master Han's diversion. The enemy's eyes were not on Deep Waters' new hiding spot. When he peeked his head out from behind the tree, he saw two players quickly heading over to where young Master Han was, while the other two continued to close in on the position he had previously been hiding. Deep Waters unhesitatingly ducked out half his body with a drawn bow and fed snipe to one of the two players creeping over to young Master Han. This unexpected arrow caused the four men to panic once more. They did not even consider that this attack was from the same player from before who had managed to change his position, but was instead convinced that it was from a third player who was also hidden in this jungle. They subconsciously believed that if there was a third player, then there could possibly be a fourth, fifth, sixth. The four men no longer dared to act with undue consideration as they conscientiously gathered together. Deep Waters took this chance to peek out and use appraisal on the four players' job class. The enemies were all thieves. This made him feel more reassured, since he would at least be able to maintain his ranged superiority over them. He fired another shot when he revealed himself, yet the player he had shot with snipe before was unfortunately no longer within his attack range, so Deep Waters could only choose another target. He even daringly ran out from his position after shooting. When he turned around to look, he saw the men closely taking note of his movement and searching for hiding spots themselves. They appeared to have no intention of actively chasing after him. Hey, not falling for it, eh? Deep Waters sighed. This act of hiding meant that they had given up the initiative to attack. Now that Deep Waters held the initiative, he boldly weaved about the trees and quickly circled around where those men were hiding. Seeing his target looking all over, unaware of the danger looming next to him, Deep Waters could only sigh as he mercilessly fired off an arrow to finish off this player. I'm afraid these guys aren't from Linian City, Deep Waters concluded in his mind. Linian City's players were experts when it came to jungle guerrilla warfare. Only death awaited anyone who would hide behind a tree and assume that they were safe. As he was thinking of this, Deep Waters traversed through the jungle and was now behind another enemy. This time, however, just as he had fully drawn his bow and was about to fire, this man's figure suddenly became transparent. Stealth, Deep Waters thought as he hurriedly released his arrow. Once the enemy's stealth was broken, the man hurriedly turned around to find out who had ambushed him. Deep Waters decided against hiding as he fired off an arrow straight to the man's head. It was too late for this man to evade this shot and he disappeared with an arrow stuck on his butt. Hey, are you dead yet? Deep Waters sent young Master Han this message. They had already added each other as friends during their meeting in the tavern. I'm immortal, young Master Han replied. The enemies are now in stealth mode, Deep Waters warned him. Got it. Young Master Han answered. In the next second, Deep Waters watched as young Master Han dash out from his hiding spot, looking particularly unhurried in the eyes of an agility-based job class. However, he knew that that was the maximum movement speed a priest could do, and it was a speed that most thieves in stealth would have trouble catching up to. That's so cunning. Deep Waters sighed. Young Master Han's action directly tapped into the weakness of the thieves, as their movement speed while in stealth was not good enough to catch up to anyone. Despite this, Deep Waters still had to give young Master Han's coordinates. Run here. Young Master Han, who was weaving through the jungle, abruptly turned to run in the precise direction he had indicated. Deep Waters could not help but whisper, having a firm grasp of coordinates to this degree, why didn't he offer to help that guy with the non-existent sense of direction do bounty mission, instead? When the thieves in stealth saw the priest fleeing, they immediately cancelled their stealth and changed it to fleet foot to give chase, yet they were still a distance away from young Master Han. Deep Waters calmly sent him another message. If you can't reach the coordinates in time, I won't save you even if you come running to hug my thigh. 1. Given young Master Han's ability to calculate precise distance and how coordinates intuitively came to him, he had long since realized the difficulty of reaching the coordinates Deep Waters had provided him with before those thieves caught up to him, Yet he remained unflustered in the least. He was a priest, after all. Tossing a heel or two on himself should be enough to sustain him through this short distance. With his superb skill control and his confidence with his golden ratio stat point distribution, any players intending to interrupt his spell casting would face a similar level of difficulty as those players attempting to interrupt Gufei's spell casting. By the time the thieves caught up to young Master Han at the position he had estimated that they would, he had already bestowed heal on himself in preparation of their assault. Immediately turning his body round, young Master Han waved toward Deepwater's direction. "Aren't you attacking yet?" The two thieves reflexively turned their heads in the direction he had gestured to. Young Master Han actually casually caused them to look away once more with this act. As a result, that bit of damage he had been expecting to receive did not come, and he was able to safely proceed to the coordinates Deepwaters had directed him to. Deepwaters was of course going to strike, yet he did not do so immediately as he was looking forward to seeing young Master Han take a little beating. A wish that seemed to more or less run in line with everyone who had met the latter. This wish of his was somewhat fulfilled when two thieves finally attacked young Master Han. When they managed to close in on him, young Master Han did not dodge their attacks. Bestowing heal on himself with exactitude, he bought time for himself as he stared at Deepwaters without saying a word or crying out for help. Deepwaters did not say anything, either. Pulling his bow out as slowly as he could, he took an arrow out, knocked it on the bow, and drew the bowstring back. Release. If only the arrow would fly slow, as well. Deepwaters thought to himself. The two thieves gritted their teeth and kept up their attacks, thinking that their combined efforts would be enough to kill off the priest. It should be an easy enough task. Afterward, they would deal with the archer, deciding on whether to kill or hide from him. Unfortunately for them, young Master Han's heal was perfectly bestowed each time, neither too late nor too soon, and he managed to maintain his HP with the greatest efficiency. And just like that, the two thieves eventually realized that it was their HP that had dropped in the red, while the priest before them remained fine. This was already Deepwaters purposely going easy on them. If he had been concentrating his firepower on just one of them, they would not even be in a situation where both players' HP were in the red. Knowing that they could not sustain this any longer, the two men quickly turned tail to run. They were hoping to recover their HP somewhere safe before deciding on their next step. However, this was when Deepwaters increased the pace of his attack and fired off homing projectile and snipe on them. That was how all the 5 thieves who had delved into the jungle got killed off. "Man, it's such a shame. Why aren't you dead?" Deepwaters kept his bow as he walked over. "I'm just too skilled. I can't die even if I want to. I feel really bad, too," young Master Han replied as he kept his staff. "Who are those guys?" Deepwaters asked. "I don't recognize any of them," young Master Han answered. "Why are they after you?" Deepwaters asked. "I don't know either. They don't seem to be players from Linian City," Deepwaters said. "Are you sure?" young Master Han asked. "If they were from Linian City, you would be dead already," Deepwaters said. Instead, young Master Han did not pay heed to that last comment as he muttered, "If they're not from Linian City but from somewhere near and a place I've visited, that only leaves Beishi City. Those people are from Beishi City." Chapter 345, This is really the end. "Do you know who's after you?" Deepwaters asked young Master Han. Young Master Han nodded his head. "It should be them." "Them? How many are we talking about here?" Deepwaters asked. "I'm not too sure. Anyway, there are surely more of them than just the 2 of us," young Master Han said. Deepwaters poked his head out from behind the tree and looked around. "Currently, there don't seem to be any other players in the jungle. Let's leave and walk around for a bit." The 2 men said this same line as they came out from behind their respective trees. They were only at the edge of the jungle, so they quickly found themselves back in Linian City after walking a short distance. Quite a few players were gathered ahead, and they were currently pointing toward the jungle. The 2 of them immediately hid behind a tree on the left and right. Deepwaters asked, "Are they the ones after you?" Young Master Han cautiously craned his neck to get a good look at those people and nodded. "Yup." When young Master Han saw the man standing at the forefront of the group beyond the jungle, he immediately identified him as the leader of the remnants of the eradicated past deeds guild in Beishi City, the Mage Blueies, Bluey's was not privy to young Master Han's plan after losing to Dusky Cloud in a game of rock paper scissors yesterday in Beishi City, but he was not the least bit bothered by missing out on it, as he did not care for young Master Han's help. Back then, he was only clashing with Dusky Cloud as usual, and his decision on whether to pursue Silver Moon or not was unaffected by the outcome of the child's game. Simply put, he had no intention of giving up the chase at all. The hatred of these former members of past deeds for Silver Moon eclipsed that which Dusky Cloud and his comrades had. It was in such an intense atmosphere that a swarm of men had rallied to participate in this hunt for their ex-guild leader. After inquiring the next stop of those players from Yunjuan City, they made sure to arrive at Linian City before the expedition in hopes of seizing a good chance to ambush Silver Moon within the city. With how difficult it was to locate Silver Moon, these men secretly decided that no matter which corner of this world Silver Moon fled to, they would give chase just so they could ruthlessly finish him off. Unfortunately, Silver Moon had already been sent back to Beishi City halfway through their journey toward Linian City. Neither Bluey's nor his men were cognizant of this as they continued to wait like fools in Linian City. Naturally, they also had no idea that traversing four seas and deep waters guild were poised to clash in a competitive quest. When they finally spotted the players from Yunjuan City, Oathless Sword and everyone else were in the middle of fleeing from that street fight and escorting prisoner Todd to the prison for night's safekeeping. While they did not know what had happened, Bluey's and his men were happy and sad when the originally 1,000-man army got reduced to their current number. They were happy because fewer players meant they would be easier to contend fault with, but they were sad because they were uncertain if Silver Moon was among those players who had perished. In the end, before they could begin their investigation, news came from Beishi City. Those few men who had stayed behind in Beishi City had spotted Silver Moon being surrounded by Dusky Cloud's men brought when they were about to log off in the Knight's barracks. Evidently, this revelation had left them all dispirited now that this trip had turned out to be for naught. Some logged off, others prepared to return to Beishi City, while a handful of them visited a local tavern for a short session. It was this last group that had coincidentally spotted Deep Waters and the 5 members of Young Master's Elite. Most men from past deeds were not familiar with the men of Young Master's Elite, but several of them would still be able to recognize Young Master Han, given his outstanding appearance. Bluey's got excited when he learned of this just as he was preparing to leave for Beishi City. This trip would be a total waste if he could kill young Master Han just once. At the very least, it would be an enjoyable endeavor. Young Master Han was, after all, among those responsible for the collapse of past deeds, so his hatred for the man was deep-seated as well. As former residents of Y City, they were adept at PvPing, so they did not waste much time in getting everything prepared. Setting up an ambush team by the Priest Academy, the players in the tavern continued to keep a close eye on their new target's movement. When Young Master's Elite departed from the tavern, the players stalking Young Master Han were pleasantly surprised to see him separate from the others. Unfortunately, they did not have too many players following Young Master Han just then. They wanted to ascertain that Young Master Han was truly isolated from the rest before acting. It would not be a stretch for Yunjuan City's players to come to Young Master Han's aid just as they were staging an ambush to the priest with a handful of men. Thus, these men tailed Young Master Han as he got further and further away from his friends. But before they could strike, Young Master Han suddenly took it turning from the street and congregated with another group of players. Instead of the other experts from Young Master's Elite, Young Master Han met up with the other leaders from Yunjuan City. Just a quick appraisal was all they needed to realize that this lot of players was strong as well, once more causing Bluey's and his men to shelf their plan to ambush him. Bluey's men could only watch this group of players chat all the way until they reached the bounty assignment hall. This was when another opportunity presented itself. Young Master Han once more separated from the group and stayed with just one friend. Soon, the two said their goodbyes to each other as well. The ex-members of past deeds no longer wished to miss out on this chance. They had previously stalled their ambush in hopes of the other members of Young Master's Elite getting further away from Young Master Han, but the man had met up with another group by the time they moved to strike. In order to not repeat such a scenario, the thieves went in stealth and moved in toward their target. In the end, Deep Waters detected their movement and allowed young Master Han to escape into the jungle with him. These former Past Deeds members figured they could still salvage the situation since they were only up against 2 players, so the 5 thieves present went into the jungle to give chase, yet they were all eliminated one after another by Deep Waters. By the time Blueies and the others made it to the place, not one of their comrade thieves remained, so they were now clueless on where young Master Han had escaped to. Big Blue, shall we go in and take a look again? A comrade asked. Blueies was a little hesitant. Quite some time had passed since they struck at young Master Han. If the man had called for reinforcement, they would have surely arrived by now. He did not have many men with him at the moment, so they would absolutely be helpless if they were to clash with Yeonju-on City's largest guild like this. Let's just go all out, what's there to be afraid of? The hot-blooded way of Y City reared its head once more. Blueies gritted his teeth for a while. Just as he was about to order his comrades to charge in, he suddenly received a message. He stood there in a daze for a moment when he read through it. All the doubts, the hesitation, and even the rage disappeared as a look of beatific surprise overcame him. Let's go. Blueies turned and waved his arm. What? Everyone was nonplussed. Vastlushness is also here, someone spotted her. Blueies happily exclaimed. Ah! The former Past Deeds members were thrilled when they heard this. Wow! The legendary Vastlushness. Some of the players present were new acquaintances Blueies had picked up from Beishi City. They were no strangers to this IGN since Blueies and the other former Past Deeds members were full of praises for this honorable woman. Let's go. The group quickly departed. Meeting a friend far outstripped that of killing an enemy to them. They've all left. Deep Waters and young Master Han were still hiding in the jungle and were too far to hear what those men had said. The two had taken turns speaking out from behind their cover to observe the enemy's movement. It happened to be Deep Waters' turn to check, so he was the one who had discovered their enemy's departure. All of them? Young Master Han was stunned as well. This action was entirely unlike the behavior of players who had once lived in Y City. These men were not the sort to easily give up whenever they targeted someone, unless the 1,000-man army of Yeonju-on City was standing before them. This was definitely not the case right now, though. The absence of the army itself would be reason enough for them to try and eliminate him. They've really left. Deep Waters boldly stepped out from behind the tree. If the enemies were still around, this act alone would expose Deep Waters and young Master Han's hiding place. Not one sound or movement could be detected. Their departure's a little strange. Young Master Han could not make sense of this. Perhaps, they have something on? Deep Waters suggested. What could be more important than killing me? Young Master Han flipped the question back at Deep Waters. Deep Waters gritted his teeth. Was there even a limit to this man's narcissism? Not everything was about him. The two men did not let their guard down completely as they warily exited the jungle. They only believed that the enemies had truly left when nothing untoward happened to them even after making their way out. Did any of your enemies put a huge bounty on your head? Deep Waters asked young Master Han when he suddenly heard voices. Just as he was about to tell young Master Han to hide, the owners of those voices came around the corner. Deep Waters relaxed when he realized that these men were the mercenaries of young Master's elite. Doesn't that person we just passed by seem like a member of the eradicated Past Deeds? Royal Godcall was asking. Seems like it. I feel as though I've seen him in Y City before. Brother Assis nodded. Hey, you guys came a little too late. Everything's fine now. Deep Waters waved to them. He figured young Master Han must have called these men to rescue him from their predicament moments ago. Where's Sword Demon? Why isn't he here? Deep Waters asked them as he neared the three men. They looked at Deep Waters a little strangely before looking over to young Master Han. I didn't call him, young Master Han answered his question, instead. Why? Deep Waters asked. Actually, these three aren't here to save me. They're here for you, young Master Han explained. Me? What for? Deep Waters asked. You've got a park value of 5 points, right? Young Master Han smiled warmly. What the? You're despicable. Deep Waters finally realized what was going on, cursing as he quickly attempted to dive back into the jungle again. He knew that these people before him were apex experts and was positive that he would be in quite the pickle if he did not make it into the jungle and properly leverage on his greatest advantage with that terrain. Sorry, Deep Waters bro. War Without Wounds inhaled a deep breath as he used charge at him. Brother Assist also moved to his flank, as Royal God Call, who had the fastest movement, ran straight towards the tree line, hoping to block Deep Waters from making it into the jungle. Even young Master Han did not stand by idly as he tossed 2 liquor bottles straight at Deep Waters. Suddenly, Deep Waters changed direction and lunged toward War Without Wounds. War Without Wounds was entirely unprepared for his move and his claymore struck Deep Waters by the waist. Seeing the hunter fly outward, he immediately cried out, "Oh, no!" The charge that connected with Deep Waters sent him sliding out fast. There was only one thought in his mind as he sailed through the air: please don't send me to a dizzy state. The dizzy state did not get triggered. Deep Waters delightedly scrambled to his feet, hoping to dive right in the depths of the jungle, when a red figure appeared before him from behind a tree. Deep Waters was no longer a stranger to this figure. "You're really finished this time." Svelte Dancer tittered as she lifted her hand and her dagger surged out, taking out Deep Waters before he could fully straighten his back. "I'll go visit you." Young Master Han quickly sent Deep Waters this message right before he disappeared. The system did not reject it. "Yup, he's sure to see it." Young Master Han nodded his head. Chapter 346, Prison Visit. Silence descended by the edge of the forest as Svelte Dancer came strolling out from the tree line after finishing off Deep Waters. She waved to young Master Han to indicate that she had done the deed. Young Master Han nodded his head back in acknowledgement and looked at the other 3 men with him as they regarded him back. "What are you staring at me for? Go resume whatever you're doing." Young Master Han dismissed them with a wave of his hand. The 3 then left separately. Young Master Han rummaged through the items in his dimensional pocket, and he found several bottles of liquor. Immediately heading toward the prison, he sent Oathless Sword this message: "Quickly gather everyone to depart for the next stop." "What? Why?" Oathless Sword asked. "The enemy's boss will be serving time in prison for the next 10 hours. If we don't seize this chance to leave now, do you really want to be continually harassed by them as we journey through the jungle tomorrow?" Young Master Han asked. Oathless Sword's eyes instantly shone. Since characters in MMOs would not truly die, and given how they could contact their friends via the messaging system, defeating the enemies by taking down the leader was not really a viable tactic in games. However, throwing the leader in prison would completely cut him off from contacting his men. This classic tactic employable in war suddenly became useful once more. 10 hours? There's no rush, then. Let's wait till those guys from Beishi City return before we leave. Oathless Sword said. Although some mercenaries that had respawned in Beishi City after losing their lives in their trek through the jungle withdrew from this mission, quite a number of them had decided to continue and were currently making their way toward Linian City to rendezvous with them. "It's best to seize what time we have. Don't forget, the prison allows players to pay for a visitation." He can still manually command his men, albeit it would be rather cumbersome, young Master Han said. "You're right. But we don't have that many players with us right now. Even if the enemies don't have Deep Waters with them now." Oathless Sword still had his reservations. "Both parties are in a very similar situation right now. They have men that went offline to rest just like we do. We won't be too far off when it comes to the headcount. The crux here is to capitalize on this chance when Deep Waters isn't around. I suggest you hurry up before this window of opportunity closes," young Master Han reasoned. Oathless Sword was aware that dragging his feet would likely be his downfall in this situation. Since they were already in such a quagmire, how much worse could it get from here on? With that thought in mind, Oathless Sword gritted his teeth and decisively seized this opportunity. He immediately called for his guild members that were still online and informed each mercenary leader to prepare for departure. Oathless Sword was a leader of a large guild, so he did not need young Master Han to walk him through all this. Young Master Han successfully convinced Oathless Sword about departing with haste from Linian City at the same time he reached Linian City's prison. After paying the exorbitant visiting fee, he entered the prison. Not many players persevered to continue their stint through the dead of night. Many of them were even asleep in-game, probably in hopes of replenishing their need for sleep in reality while shaving off their prison sentence. This method was something game officials did not approve of. By their words, although the game allowed players to mimic sleep, and it would indeed allow them to achieve the necessary rapid eye movement sleep, Their recovery from physical fatigue was entirely dependent on their resting posture in reality, even if they simulated a sleeping posture in parallel world. Thus, sleeping in-game often gave players sore backs and strained necks, and that feeling was not a virtual sensation but an actual signal that their real body was giving. Such sensations from their real body would not be in the least bit reduced while they were fully immersed in the game. The game company did not wish for people to die due to mistakenly attributing the pain that they were feeling to sneak attack performed by other players instead of it being caused by actual life and death situations in reality. With regard to sleeping, some asked if it was possible for players to connect to their VR gaming set while lying in bed. The gaming officials' answer to this question: such an act was tantamount to misusing the gaming set, so they could not be held liable for any resulting damage. Thus, players would rather bear the sore backs than risk damaging the gaming equipment, since this VR equipment in reality was 100 times more important than the best equipment in game. Seeing all the players lying all over the place in each cell, young Master Han finally spotted Deepwater's alone in one of these cells, lying in a corner with his back facing the outside of the cell's confines. "Hey, are you facing the wall to reflect on your actions?" Young Master Han knocked on the cell door as he spoke. Deepwaters slowly turned around, the displeasure evident on his face as he raged. "You jerk! You dare show your face here?" Young Master Han grinned cheekily. "Why won't I? You should know by now how much I love seeing others in a situation like yours." Deepwaters was grinding his teeth as he cracked his knuckles threateningly. "Just you wait. I'll show you what's up once I get out of here." Young Master Han laughed before he lightly tossed a bottle of liquor toward the other. This throw of his was very ingenious. If Deepwaters chose not to dodge it, that bottle would hit him square on his head. If he did dodge it, the bottle would shatter on the wall behind him and spill its content on him. The shards of glass might also even fly toward him. Thus, without any other options, Deepwaters could only reach out to grab it. "Fuck me." 200, you're really rich. Deepwaters took the bottle and was about to throw it back when he read the label. This was the most expensive liquor available in game, a bottle that even Svelte Dancer would be unwilling to waste money on. There was no discernible benefit to drinking this alcohol in game, after all. Young Master Han did not respond to his comment, simply saying, "You'll be out in 10 hours' time. Unfortunately, you won't know where I'm gone by then." Speaking of which, I believe that the competitive quest you're on is only limited to the region Linian City is in. Do you have any idea on where's our next stop? It's true, then? You really did plan to get me imprisoned, so you guys can abscond from the city without much hindrance. Deepwaters said. Unexpectedly, young Master Han actually sighed. I wished that were the case. It would be an absolutely exquisite plan if that were truly the case. Sadly, it was nothing but an idea that popped in my head at that very moment. I definitely did not arrange for those men to hunt me like that. But, in the process of our escape, the park value you were honored with instantly became the seed that sprouted this grand idea. Let us cheers to that great idea. Deepwater's face was still black as not a word escaped from him. The only outlet for his pent-up rage was this bottle of liquor, which he brusquely took a long draw from. His actions and demeanor clearly sent this message to young Master Han: he was only drinking by his accord and was surely not about to raise a glass to that. Everyone could tell that Deepwaters only gained all those park points because he had been helping young Master Han. Even Deepwaters himself was vexed to mention this to young Master Han, knowing full well that saying such things to the latter would not make the man remorseful or anything. In fact, young Master Han was even likely to flip the script and reproach him for not separating personal and professional relationships, unclear of his position as he got himself confused at such a crucial moment. Damn, this was considered being confused? He could only blame himself for having a good conscience, not even thinking about it and just lending his hand the moment he saw someone being targeted. Who would be like this heartless cad, forever scheming and calculating? Anyway, this conversation Deepwaters had simulated in his mind had quite a bit of sense and basis behind it. Don't be so smug about this, Deepwaters said, adding, although I'm stuck here in prison, my comrades still aren't pushovers for you guys. Young Master Han laughed. You should be well aware of the limits of your comrades' capabilities. Deepwaters was quiet. He unconsciously took another swig from that bottle of liquor in his hand. His comrades. He would not be their boss if they were stronger than him. Alright, it's about time. I gotta go. Young Master Han interrupted his pensive thoughts. I sincerely wish you an early death and reincarnation, Deepwaters said. That's not really possible. After all, you're not dead and only stuck in prison. So how would I lose my life? Young Master Han chuckled. How are you feeling now? What do you mean how? Feeling a little dizzy? Young Master Han asked. Did you spike my drink? Now that young Master Han had mentioned it, Deepwaters did indeed feel lightheaded. What a joke. There are no such drugs in the game. Young Master Han laughed. However, that liquor is the strongest out of all the available alcohols in this game. Instead of calling it 200, you should call it 170. This isn't the 200. Deepwaters stared at the bottle. Who told you the 200 bottle must contain the 200? Alright, enough talk. Time to go to sleep. Young Master Han waved his hand. You jerk. Deepwaters groggily cursed as his legs gave way and he found himself on his knees. The bottle in his hand slipped, but it did not crash to the ground, and the bottle's remaining content merely spilled out. You've got quite the tolerance to even finish half a bottle like that. Deepwaters heard young Master Han commending him as his vision dimmed. He saw young Master Han take something out from his dimensional pocket and tossed it over to him. The earnings we've got this time around are all thanks to you. Best you keep that properly. Don't blame me if someone else pockets it. Young Master Han left after he said his piece. Deepwaters wanted to check what the man had thrown him in his state of grogginess, but the alcohol he had drank in this fully immersive game finally got to him and he crumpled to the ground, fast asleep. As young Master Han strolled out the prison, he saw several players hurriedly rushing into it. He nonchalantly stepped aside and gave way to these men while he maintained a straight face. The lighting within the prison was already abysmal, so these men did not notice that someone else was visiting in their haste to make it deeper into the prison. As young Master Han took his last step out of the prison, he heard urgent voices coming from those men. Deepwaters, stop sleeping. Get up. Those guys seem to be leaving. Deepwaters did not hear them, though. He was too far in the cell for the men to reach him, so all they could do was pelt him with their miscellaneous items from their dimensional pockets. However, no matter how they pelted him, he did not rouse him from his stupor. They yelled and made so much noise that even the other players were disturbed from their sleep. It was not easy to fall asleep in game. These players really wished they could have slept through their entire sentence in one go, but they were instead so rudely awakened by these players' din, so they felt absolutely disgruntled toward them. Soon enough, the entire prison was flooded with curses and expletives as everyone began to fling insults at each other. These players could only do this since they were unable to settle their disagreement physically. Outside the prison, the players from Yunjuan City were all neatly gathered together. Oathless Sword was rather surprised when he saw young Master Han stroll out of the prison like he did. Let's get going. Young Master Han said. Our plan to leave will surely get exposed once everyone gathers. Oathless Sword carefully looked around for any signs of Deepwaters' men. Deepwaters probably knows of our intention by now, so he'll at the very least come up with a sort of plan. Let's quickly leave while he has difficulty relaying everything. There's no need to rush. Deepwaters won't be able to do any commanding for at least the next half hour, young Master Han said. Why? Oathless Sword was perplexed. He's had too much to drink. Young Master Han calmly replied. Chapter 347, Taking their leave first. Why are we suddenly continuing the expedition? It was inevitable for the Yunjuan City's players to pose this question upon being gathered in haste. Because we only have this fleeting opportunity. Oathless Sword's solemn expression right now made him look like a timber wolf. What about the other comrades that aren't here? Someone asked. We'll tell them to make their way over once they come online tomorrow, Oathless Sword answered. Where's our next stop? Someone asked. Oathless Sword looked all around him. Beckoning the player who had asked a question to him, he whispered, private chat. Curses came from all over. What's going to happen to Miles? Sword Demon and the rest of Young Master's elite were busy discussing this on their mercenary channel. Him? Can he even leave Linian City? We'll just be dragged down if we stay with him. Young Master Han did not mince his words. So we're just abandoning him here? Royal God Call found this decision hard to accept. Perhaps, you can stay behind and aid him, young Master Han proposed. How am I gonna be of help? Royal God Call asked. Young Master Han shrugged his shoulders. Royal God Call was in deep contemplation. Young Master Han finally said, "Fine. I really tried protecting your self-esteem, but you're just asking for it, so I'll just give it to you all straight. You randoms are nothing but dead weight on him. Help him? Not weighing him down by following him around is the best contribution any of you can provide. Fucking hell, you're the random one. We're leaving." Royal God Call was the first to walk away with a huff. "Royal, you're going the wrong way," young Master Han dispassionately informed. Thus, Royal God Call coolly turned 180 degrees and continued walking. "Alright, let's go, let's go." Most of the troops started moving onward. Although they appeared scattered, the players' positioning and the battalion's job class composition were already properly formed to counter any ambush coming from all sides. The archers even fired off arrows in every direction from time to time, hitting a few random players as a result. None of the unfortunate victims moved to berate their assailants, however. Who would be foolish enough to confront such a large battalion over a small matter? Anyway, they walked along the edge of Linian City for a while, but no movement came from Deepwater's camp. They would soon be entering the jungle. Everyone looked calm on the surface as they bid each other to take care before diving right into the trees. They advanced slowly but surely. Sakurazaka Muni's group took the lead to check for traps, while warriors and priests followed behind to protect the flanks. The mages tossed AO spells around them whenever possible. Archers kept a constant stream of arrows flying toward the treetops. Although the arrows would just fall and pierce their men, no one complained. The knights incessantly directed blessing of spirit on everyone to increase their magic defense. The warriors busied themselves with shaking every tree they walked past. Finally, the thieves patrolled the expedition's perimeter, performed reconnaissance, and acted as scouts. Everyone had their roles. Oathless Sword tasked all of them to quickly inform him of any enemy spotting or the loss of someone's life. Once bitten, twice shy. Yeonju on City players learned from their mistake and found a way to take precautionary measures against every trick and play that Deepwater's camp had previously done to them on their journey through the jungle. There should not be any more problems this time, right? Of course, there was none. Deepwaters and his men were still around, yet quite a number went offline, and only some remained online. Plenty of their mages were currently serving time in prison, which greatly affected their combat might. Moreover, Deepwaters was still in a drunken stupor. The others spent a long time arguing but failed to come up with a solid plan, so each of them ended up doing their thing. As a result, all of them were easily repelled by Yeonju on City's players. The enemy team that was monitoring the expedition from behind never found a chance to strike and could only watch them escape from the jungle. All sorts of feelings welled up in their hearts. The moment the last player from Yeonju on City stepped out of the jungle, everyone experienced a myriad of emotions that was too hard to describe. They were finally out of that ravenous jungle that had previously devoured plenty of their brothers and sisters. Beautifully done. Oathless Sword, who was beside young Master Han, happily patted the latter's shoulder. "Hey, I suppose you won't feel too exploited when you fish out your coin purse this time, right?" Young Master Han nonchalantly asked. "Ha ha ha. You're making yourself seem like an outsider. What are you talking about money for?" Oathless Sword chuckled as he strode away. Indeed, the fee he had paid young Master's elite this time around was truly worth it that it did not elicit a complaint from him. They had incurred heavy losses from the enemy's vigorous assault the first time around and lost over half of their men. In comparison, their trek through the jungle this time was fairly smooth and risk-free. How could he not be elated? He felt that every coin he spent was well deserved. He might have plenty of opinions, suspicions, and dissatisfaction about young Master's elite before, but reality proved that the group is indeed a huge problem solver for them. Hiring them for this mission had been a wise choice. Oathless Sword even expressed his concern for the currently offline Goofy who did not manage to join them in their escape. "Money? You've already gotten paid for this mission? Where is it, then?" Royal God Call, War Without Wounds, and the others looked at young Master Han in shock once Oathless Sword left. "I've already spent it all," young Master Han replied. "On what?" The eyes of the two men widened. "On Deepwaters." "I gave it to him," young Master Han answered. Their eyes returned to normal, but it was still open in disbelief. "All of it? You should at least leave some for us. We've done a bit of work, too." "Oh, please." Young Master Han impatiently retorted, "The one who killed Deepwater's was Svelte Dancer. Did you guys see her come over to ask me for money? You two should learn a thing or two from that lady." "Fuck, is she your average lady? She's the richest player in the game." The two showed young Master Han their middle fingers. Young Master Han was truly too despicable to actually tell these two to learn from the attitude the richest player had toward money and achieve actualization. Alright. Oathless Sword, who was done basking in his happiness, began reminding all the players to rein in their celebration. "It's getting late. If nothing unexpected happens, we should arrive at the next city in about 3 hours. It's best if we seize this opportunity to be on our way." Oh. The players were all in high spirits. Those players from Linian City may not easily give up their pursuit. "Brother Sword Demon, bring a few thieves with you and stay behind the pack in stealth. Secretly keep watch for a while. All of you can return once we cover quite a distance without encountering any issues. What do you think?" Oathless Sword now felt that young Master's elite was the most dependable, so he delegated this important task to Sword Demon. "Roger." Sword Demon nodded. Thus, after choosing several thieves from the mercenary groups and his guild, he passed the authority to Sword Demon. They were currently lacking in manpower, as many mercenaries had withdrawn, so Oathless Sword could only get his men to bear some risk as well. Once all these thieves came forward, Sword Demon took them to bring up the rear as the rest of Yunju City's players carried on to their next destination. These players made sure to leave behind messages to those who were currently not with them, informing them of their departure from Linian City on that very same night toward the next city and telling them to hurry over upon receiving their messages. Most players received this message rather early, yet quite a number only learned of this when they went online the following night. Among these players was Gufei. The message Gufei received was naturally different. Not only did he have to make the journey alone, he also had to clear off his park value of over 30 points. He was essentially a walking disaster. Bounty mission was being issued throughout Parallel World, so Gufei would still be hunted no matter where he ended up in. Currently, he bore a weighty park value of 54 points. Many players were already worshipping this Slayer god and inquiring about him. Given the attention others were dedicating into this matter, why would Gufei be any different? Before he logged onto the game, Gufei did something he had never done before. He thoroughly researched on the matter. He lurked on Linian City's forums for any relevant information about the city. No one wished to lose 5 levels as well as spend the rest of their in-game lives behind bars. Gufei only had a solution to this, and that was to do what he had done countless times before: bounty mission. He was determined to clear off his park value. This would usually be a simple task for him, yet he was currently facing a nearly insurmountable difficulty this time. First, the NPC guards would attempt to apprehend him the moment he appeared. There was no point in wondering why they were able to find him. If the players had the Windchaser's emblem that let them refresh the coordinates of their targets every minute, why would it be a stretch for the shameless system to give the guards a way to track Gufei every second? Instead, Gufei was unfamiliar with Linian City. In Yunjuan City, he had essentially been tempered by experience to the point where he could tell the nearest landmark to a place with a glance to the coordinates. In fact, he even knew how populated the said location would be. This was something he had learned after spending all those hours down the streets and alleyways hunting down and slaying bounty targets. In Linian City, he would have to take note of the very coordinates he was on while running and of the street intersections, and that was before adding the pursuing guards to the equation. This was a truly disadvantageous setting to be in. The first problem Gufei had to deal with was clearing off his park value, and the second problem was that he had to complete all the preparations for this task in one day. He used almost half the day just familiarizing himself with the map for Linian City hand-drawn by players and getting acquainted with the coordinates of each location as he attempted to find any exploitable route. He also tried finding a loophole to the bounty system, rules for someone with over 30 park points that he could take advantage of, and any probable weakness of the guards. Unfortunately, not one bit of information turned up during his search. Gufei was the god that first broke through the 30 park point ceiling, and he had no predecessor. He was the first man to eat crab one, a pioneer that would now become a teaching experience to future players who would break through the ceiling as well. Gufei was rather annoyed. Even if he went online and Fleeting Smile was online, he was sure he would have difficulty extracting information from the latter. Maps, terrain, coordinates. He could only memorize these things to the best of his ability in order to efficiently tackle the missions that he was about to pick up in Linian City. His reputation as a kung fu genius was not mere talk. As someone known for his kung fu versatility in the martial arts community, no one should doubt Gufei's ability to memorize information. After spending half a day memorizing and testing himself, Gufei was confident that he did not miss out anything. So he proceeded to enter Parallel World. Chapter Notes 1. A quote attributed to the famous Chinese philosopher called Lixin. Essentially, he stated that the first man to think of eating crab deserves to be praised, for only a brave man would be bold enough to attempt eating it. Crabs look scary and ugly. The first man who had eaten it surely needed courage to do so, but just who is this great man? Chapter 348. A scenic backdrop. Numerous exclamations resounded the moment Gufei appeared in a flash of white light in one of Linian City's log-off point. While many players were wondering who the godly existence that earned 54 park points was, rumors about him had already made their rounds in Linian City. That park god is the present trending video Mage. Some players who were bored even went offline just to watch the said video repeatedly. These players committed Gufei's attire to their memory and went as far as to memorize the number of creases in his midnight spirit robe from shoulder to waist by magnifying the screenshots that they had taken to have a better look of him. As such, the moment he appeared, Gufei was immediately recognized. Excited screams that increase in volume and quantity broke out as there were no shortage of players around the spawn point. It was not long before the crowd became a mob that gathered around Gufei. He was then unfortunately subjected to this mob's blatant and inhumane scrutiny. Gufei had calculated and prepared for every possible scenario, yet he had failed to account for the nosiness of the general masses. Toward these players that had countless of hours to spare playing MMOs, Gufei could not imagine how powerful their busybody ways were. TSK, TSK, TSK. Gufei was currently not fighting with anyone, nor was he using any skills, so the crowd could only watch him stand there and give such an inane reaction. Everyone, please make way. Gufei helplessly said. Yes, yes, of course. At least, these players surrounding him knew where to draw the line. Just because they idolized him did not mean that it was okay for them to block his way. These players who were unintentionally blocking the entrance to the spawn point shuffled to their left and right to make a path out for Gufei. Thanks a lot, everyone. You guys should also leave if there's nothing else. Gufei bid the surrounding players farewell before pushing his way through the barely cleared out path. From time to time, some players would reach out to touch Gufei as he passed by, causing him to wave and bat off those hands that poked out in his discomfort. I sure have the making of a superstar, he mused. Unfortunately, this happy scene had to be cut short as cries of "Who's that? Stop pushing me!" and so on were soon heard coming from the players in the back. Gufei instantly knew that the ones whom he had been expecting finally arrived. The guards the system had sent were still as dull and rigid as ever. With many players gathered in the area, these NPCs did not shout to get them to move or find another route, nor did they attack them. Instead, they single-mindedly advanced forward toward their target. Knowing that Gufei was right in front, they opted for the shortest, straight path toward him. The level of intelligence these guards were currently demonstrating raised plenty of doubts among the passionate gamers in the crowd over the AI of this game. These NPC guards had abundant strength and power, which was why the Hunter's Archer formation of Deepwater's guild was almost instantly scattered when they walked through. However, that was a formation players established for PvP to give them a certain space between one another to unleash their skills accordingly, which allowed these guards to brusquely force their way in and caused everyone to fall to the wayside. Right now, however, the players were all tightly packed around Gufei to watch the show, and it was a very inconsiderate and heartless gathering, superscript 1 at that. No matter how strong these guards were, they had no way of defying physics to squash the players blocking their way into meat paste. Moreover, Their strength might be huge, but it was not immeasurably so. With many players piled together, how easy would it be for them to try and push their way through? Gufei quickly realized that the narrow path the players had formed for him was being swallowed by the guards forcing their way in. He hesitated no more and instantly cast Blink, reappearing 5 meters ahead. At the same time, the players from either side on the spot he had vacated reintegrated with one another again, their arms flailing as expletives flew freely. That was close, Gufei said to himself. Fortunately, the guards did not form up horizontally like a bulldozer and plow through the crowd, which explained why they were only attempting to push through in such a small area. He was more or less in a safe distance from the NPCs now. It was unfortunate that those players back there were taken by surprise and were now squeezed like conjoined winds. This is an opportunity. His eyes shone with light. Since the NPC guards were foolish enough to rush into the crowd, and the players themselves would take some time to disperse, this blockade was rather effective and afforded him a chance that he did not plan to miss. Thinking of this, Gufei hastened his footsteps some more and adopted the mannerism of a person in a hurry. He ignored these passionate fans of his that were reaching their hands out to him, barely brushing their fingertips on him. This also showed how these gamers were a step above the fans of superstars in how they acted. At the very least, no one was throwing themselves right onto Gufei and not letting go despite the lack of any security personnel. Of course, this could also be attributed to the nature of the person that they were idolizing. A superstar depended on fans' support for a living, so he or she would not slay them. As for Gufei, a raise of his hand meant a player dropping a level at the cost of a mere park point. Gufei finally made it through while the players were being knocked all over the place by the guards. These players' anger was probably reaching its boiling point. Meanwhile, Gufei had already disappeared from everyone's sights, no longer caring for the plight of those players he had left behind. These players incessantly hurled curses as they slowly began to disperse as the guards waded through the crowd, undeterred from their target. When they realized that they had been blocking the path of guards that the system had sent to apprehend the video mage, these players felt even more annoyed and all the more regretful. After all, they were really looking forward to this part of the show. This was another difference between the fans of superstars and of gamers. Fans of a superstar would never look forward to their idol being hunted. Gufei sprinted recklessly down the street, attracting everyone's attention everywhere he passed. Oftentimes, those players would raise their hands and called after him, cries like "Wife, quickly come out and see the park god," could also be heard time and again. Since Gufei was moving about at his top speed, encircling him would not be as easy as before. A short distance away, under their captain's command, the guards were emotionlessly chasing after him in an organized and unhurried, yet efficient manner. This squad of guards strongly resembled a pack of Terminators on the hunt. Of course, their termination target was Gufei. Those players who were incidentally in their way were all sent flying. What made this experience worse was that they were trampled on right after they were knocked off their feet, suffering quite a bit even if they did not get killed. Right behind these uniformly chasing guards was a completely disorganized horde of Linian City's players. These players, who cared not for their posturing, chased after the guards in hopes of bearing witness to any exciting scene that might crop up. This lone man being chased by a squad that had a mob following right behind was like a three-act structure that framed the scenic backdrop of Linian City. Survival of the fittest was the name of the game for this chase sequence, so those that had slow movement speed were quickly left in the dust. Gufei looked over his shoulder as he ran. Seeing that the guards were quite a distance away from him, he was loath to use Blink. Spending a full day doing painstaking research paid off as he successfully made it to the bounty assignment hall in no time. Entering the hall to pick up a bounty mission was something Gufei was used to doing. However, when he got a glimpse of Linian City's wanted players list, he really felt like puking blood. Linian City was truly too peaceful. Besides a handful of players with 2 park points on top of the list, all the targets only had 1 park point to their name. Gufei had no time to gripe about this and just chose any random target before dashing out of the hall. Death was all that awaited him if the guards managed to chase him all the way into the building. The moment he exited the place, he spotted the guards charging towards him from down the street. Gufei did not look at the coordinates and merely ran in the direction that would bring him the furthest away from the guards. Once he got onto the right path, He quickly checked his target's coordinates and felt a headache coming on. The target was in the exact opposite direction of where he was currently running to. The quickest way to confront this man would be to turn round and pass through the squad of guards after him, but such an act was simply suicidal. This was when Goofei's day of homework showed its worth, as he was able to plot out the most effective route that circuited round toward his target's location. Goofei swiftly took to the intersection ahead of him. However, in the next minute, he cried out in dismay at the sight of his target's freshly updated coordinates. The god of fortune had clearly abandoned him today, as change between the two sets of coordinates made him believe that his damnable target was actually part of the third group forming the backdrop of Linian City. Not one method was left besides directly breaking through the guards pursuing him. He needed to find a location that went in a circle and ring around his target's back. The houses in the city were constructed in rows, so plenty of places where he could circle around existed. However, to create such a large ring around like that, ignoring whether Goofei had enough time to complete this ring or otherwise, he would still have difficulties finding fugitive 56,841 among the mob of fans trailing after him. Once again, Goofei's research proved to be his salvation for this quandary. With a clear grasp of Linian City's terrain and landform like the back of his hand, he managed to match everything he saw along the way and merging them with the material he had spent half a day poring over. Soon enough, Goofei thought of a great idea to rid himself of his current dilemma. Yuanmu Tavern was the largest tavern in Linian City, and it was located at the heart of it. Just as the name suggested, the establishment was in the shape of a round timber. Its roof was even made out like a tree ring that kept circling round and round. Goofei did not enter the establishment when he got to its entrance. Instead, he went halfway around to the back of the tavern. The guards, who had been chasing Goofei all this while, were just 3 or 2 meters away from him. Reaching half of Yuanmu Tavern's circumference, Goofei leapt into the air and pointed his finger upward, teleporting himself right on the tavern's roof. He continued to run when he landed. Somewhere below, he heard a sound of something heavily striking the ground. Goofei knew that those NPC guards must be displaying their flying up the roof with Earth Splitter skill, but he did not thinking about it at the moment and merely continued to run along the eaves of the roof. Beyond Goofei's expectation, the third act just happened to chase up to them and was running along Yuanmu Tavern. He held the higher ground, so he was able to easily sweep his gaze on the sea of players before him. Goofei's target was among these bobbing heads and should have serial number 56,841 floating above his head. Yeah! Goofei, who had never once stopped running, used his momentum to leap off the roof and hurtle himself straight to his target. Twin incineration. Incinerate. Goofei chanted loudly as his moonlit nightfalls pierced through with uncanny accuracy. At this critical moment, he did not think of how risky his maneuver was, that children should not be emulating at home, and merely thrusted his sword toward his target's forehead. Goofei's sword penetrated through the air as the wind itself seemed to feed the flames on his sword, so much so that he could even feel the heat emanating from twin incineration. In that moment, Goofei felt as though he had found what the legends often described as the sensation of the wielder and the sword becoming one. Chapter 349, Continuing the expedition. The players that made up this third act should have reached a certain standard in their movement speed. Among the speedsters, only Svelte Dancer was probably capable of surviving Goofei's twin incineration, provided that she wore her fire-resistant coat. Goofei's current target was only an average player in Linian City, so he was definitely not the sort that could survive his one strike. White light flashed as Goofei's descent from the rooftop continued. The fire from his moonlit nightfalls intermingled with that flash of white light, making it seem as though his one strike had caused the person's head to explode in that visual spectacle. The color on the spectators' faces drained from shock as someone yelped, "The park god is at it again!" This caused everyone to swiftly clear out a path for Goofei and to place their weapons across their chests in a defensive stance. "Everyone, calm down. I'm just doing bounty mission, I'm not the type to slay the innocent for no reason," Goofei said. Oh! These people easily connected the dots at his mention of bounty mission, especially since they had previously seen him run into the bounty assignment hall. However, Goofei's claim of not being the type to slay the innocent was quickly met with the crowd's scoff. His park value of 54 points translated into 54 lives, so who would believe that he was not the type to slay the innocent without any reason? In any case, with the players calming down, Gufei managed to easily make his escape. Those under the eaves of Yuanmu Tavern began stretching their necks in search of the NPC guards pursuing Gufei. This was when the sound of the ground shattering was heard. Following this sound, a handful of figures sailed through the air in rapid succession. Somehow, the entire squad was able to maintain its orderliness even when mid-air. That's way too cool. The players were entranced by this scene. However, their awestruck expression over the string of figures' uniform landing turned into one of distress in the next instant. Who would have guessed that the Earth Splitter skill for jumping up the roof could be used by these guards to get down from the roof as well? Although these guards were unintentionally targeting them, some unlucky individuals, who happened to be standing right under the point of these NPCs' swords, were unfortunately killed off. These mindless guards would never seek to avoid executing such moves just because there were players in the way. They landed on the ground with such force that even the resulting white lights of the killed off players dissipated from it. As for those who were fortunate enough not to be the direct recipient of the killing move, they could only despise the fact that Earth Splitter was an AO skill. Having their HP with that first landing, those who had failed to flee in time were turned into white lights when the second guard landed. Their cries caused Gufei to look backward. The series of white lights flashing by the tavern cruelly made for a scene that even he had not foreseen. And because of this incident, all became aware that even onlookers like them could get caught up in this matter. Gufei continued to flee and the guards continued to chase. Once more, he let this squad chase him for a short distance. Just as they were about to catch up to him, Gufei patted his Windchaser's emblem and activated its teleport ability. Upon bounty mission completion, the user could teleport himself to the bounty mission assignment hall by activating it. Gufei was well aware of how fast these guards could move. Having pored over Linian City's map for almost an entire day, he could more or less determine the guards' distance from the bounty assignment hall. Knowing their distance and speed, he easily calculated the time that it would take them to reach him. This was just simple math, after all. Equipped with this knowledge, he could easily accomplish many things, such as munching on an apple to replenish his consumed mana. The number on the wanted players list was as paltry as ever. There were actually many bounties with high park value last night, but they were all hunted down by either Yunjuan City's players or Deepwater's guildmates. After filling up his mana, obtaining his next target, and checking the new coordinates, Gufei once more mapped out another route in his head while he accurately estimated the chasing guard's current distance to him. Since this was the first time he had planned out his bounty hunting operation, Gufei's plan was nothing less than perfect. The original difficulty lay in that first wave. He had no idea which direction the system would send the guards for him, so Gufei was worried that they would be on him the moment he logged into the game. That would have made things harder for him as he was unsure whether he could make it to the bounty assignment hall without getting caught by the guards. Thanks to the unintentional interference of the spectators, Gufei was able to gain the much-needed time to grab his first bounty mission. Upon completing this mission, Gufei was able to utilize his Windchaser's emblem to instantly distance himself from the chasing guards. Every subsequent mission he accomplished let him evade their pursuit. It was a simple yet elegant cycle. Unless the target he obtained from the wanted players list happened to be standing beside the guards, there was simply no need for him to do what he had done before. Nonetheless, given how huge Linian City was, the chances of this happening were not exactly high. So far, he had not come across such a situation. After struggling for 2 full hours, Gufei finally breathed easily now that his park value was down to 29 points after having cleared 24 park points through the bounty mission and by staying online for 2 hours. Now that his park value was below 30 points, the NPC guards no longer actively pursued him. He would be fine as long as he avoided the stationary guards and the patrolling soldiers around the city. Should he clear off all of his park value now or chase after the group that had departed for the next city? Gufei pondered on this for a while before opening the mercenary channel to ask for input. "You're not yet in prison?" Young Master Han was the first to respond. "My park value is now down to 29 points. Gufei announced his accomplishment. "How did you deal with the guards?" Royal God Call asked. These mercenaries firmly believed that no players would be able to beat Gufei given his transcendent strength, yet they had apparently still underestimated him. "Nothing much," Gufei answered truthfully, asking back, "And you guys?" "Us? We're currently waiting for the ferry." Gufei could detect anger from young Master Han's typed words. "Screw Linian City's ferry," Brother Assist added. "We've been waiting here for 2 hours," Royal God Call said. "Go damn it." War Without Wounds did not say anything besides that curse. "Perhaps, the ferry won't be there yet by the time I make it there," Gufei gleefully said. "Sorry to say, but I can already see the ferry approaching." Young Master Han dispelled his delusion. "You'll probably make it over here in a little over an hour if you leave Linian City now and be able to catch the 11 p.m. ride," Brother Assist said. "How long will the journey be?" Gufei wrinkled his brows. "About half an hour based on the information I've gathered," Brother Assist replied. "That's fine, I guess. I won't log off too late." Gufei sighed in relief. "I'll make my way right now." These late-night experts all rolled their eyes. Gufei tidied his attire before stepping out of Linian City's bounty assignment hall. He strolled along the streets and, at the absence of any pursuing guards, Gufei whistled in a carefree way. He felt as though the air in Linian City had become fresher. Arriving at one of Linian City's gates, he saw that a large crowd in the midst of sending someone off. Gufei reflexively glanced over and realized that the person being sent off was someone he knew. This group of men happened to glance over to him as well. Some of them gawked at the sight of him, and one of them even brandished his saber toward him and bellowed, "I'll kill ya." It was Gufei's turn to widen his eyes at the man charging toward him from just 2 meters away. This man swung his saber wildly as he incessantly roared. Is he drunk?" Gufei could smell alcohol in the air. Looking at these men before him, he saw that each of them was red in the face and was leaning on one another for support as they swayed in place. A mage stepped out and pointed his staff at Gufei, saying, "Thunder, thunder, thunder, thunder," for the longest time. He then turned to look at the man beside him and asked, "What comes after thunder?" "Thunderbolt." Strike." The person chanted as he pointed his finger at Gufei. Ignoring that he was not a lighting mage, even if he was one, adding that syllable in the incantation would cause the spell casting to fail. At least, the man in front was now aware of the words he had missed. The mage raised his staff and attempted to chant once more. Gufei was about to make his move when someone stepped out and pulled the mage's arm, saying, "Forget it. Lushness, it's that guy." The mage Blueies pointed at Gufei, finally saying something intelligible. "I know." Vast Lushness nodded her head. "I've long buried the hatchet with him in Yunjuan City, so there's no need to dredge up the past." Blueies was still in a haze, having drunk so much. Shaking his head in confusion, he muttered something unintelligible once more. However, the hand he was using to cast spells was at least no longer outstretched. Vast Lushness gazed at Gufei. "Are you trying to catch up to them?" "Yup." Gufei nodded his head. "Where's Mooney and the others?" "They left last night while I was catching up with my friends here," Vast Lushness answered. "From last night until now?" Gufei regarded these drunk as a skunk men that looked as though they had spent the entire night wrestling in the sauce and drinking. Vast Lushness rubbed her eyes, revealing a tired expression as she nodded. "Yeah. And you're planning to carry on with the mission right now?" Gufei looked at these men once more. They were evidently old acquaintances of hers in Y City. It would be more logical for her to stay and play the game with them from here onward. "Of course. Since I've pledged myself to the mission, it is my responsibility to see it through the end," Vast Lushness answered before saying, "Let's go." "Oh, let's." Gufei naturally had no reasons to refuse. Vast Lushness said goodbye to all her friends and walked alongside Gufei. The two knew the way as Gufei had those men from Young Master's Elite informing him, while Vast Lushness, even more incredulously, was told in a detailed way for over 180 times of the route to reach the ferry by Sakurazaka Muni, who was in fear of them never meeting each other again if she ended up walking the wrong way. Gufei could only regrettably match his walking pace with the priest he had in tow. Making this trip in an hour was no longer possible. As for 2 hours, Gufei looked at the time. "With 2 hours, I don't think we're gonna make it for that 11 p.m. ferry," he said. "Don't worry. That port is apparently a log-off point, so it won't affect the time you go offline." Vast Lushness glanced over to him. "Is that so? That's good, then." Gufei brightened up considerably. Chapter 350, Still not making it to the boat after walking for a quite distance with vast lushness, Gufei realized that he had made a severe mistake. He had mistakenly assumed that vast lushness was sober when in fact she was also totally drunk. The reason for this mistake was due to the people he had been comparing her with. The demure lady vast lushness looked as if she had a good hold of herself, with the sloppy men like Bluey's and the lot acting as a contrast. Without those men, her state of drunkenness was clearly exposed. She swayed in her steps and her breath strongly stank of alcohol. Gufei thought of going back to look for Bluey's and his men, but he did not know the whereabouts of those drunkards now. "Hey!" he called out to her. "What?" She half turned and cast him a sidelong glance. "There's a tree in front of you," he informed. "You think I didn't know that?" Lifting her arm, she pushed herself away from the tree she had nearly walked into. In the end, her body was thrown off to a side and her head knocked right into another tree. Before he could say a word, vast lushness shook her head to clear her mind and patted the tree. "Sorry." What else could he do besides facepalm? "Say, why don't we go back to Linian City and rest there for a while?" Gufei suggested as he watched vast lushness keep on walking ahead. You think I'm drunk?" She narrowed her eyes and gazed at him. "Are you not?" he inquired sincerely. "Of course not." Vast lushness vehemently denied as she continued to walk unsteadily forward. He was speechless. She was someone who would stubbornly stand her ground even when she was being beaten to death. Adding the obstinacy brought by alcohol, she was currently more difficult to coax her of anything. Gufei could only helplessly follow behind her and occasionally prevent her from bumping into trees. Each time, this would be accompanied by her outburst of "What are you doing? I can walk by myself." Drunk people, besides being obstinate, would often become more talkative. The usually taciturn vast lushness would become quite chatty as the topic shifted to the nearest person to her, Gufei. Naturally, her question to him would naturally be, "How did you get so powerful?" "It's because I know Kung Fu," he answered truthfully. "Kung Fu?" "HMPH." She looked at him in a way that seemed to say, "Don't try fooling me just because I'm a little tipsy." Gufei could only facepalm once more. She was just a drunk person, there was no need for him to treat this question so seriously. "Tree." Gufei already lost count how many times he had shouted this warning. She twisted her body away using her conditioned reflexes and barely missed the big tree before her. "At this rate, will we even reach before 12 midnight? He wondered forlornly. However, misfortune and fortune were always paired together. The good news here for Gufei was that the duration of being under the influence of alcohol in game was not long, just like the pain receptor in game, after having been tweaked to be much weaker than in reality by the game designers. Thus, players would quickly sober up after stopping their consumption of alcohol. This explained how Bluey's and his men were able to continuously drink for nearly 20 hours straight. These men were not hard drinkers, but they managed to accomplish such a feat thanks to this particular aspect of Parallel World. Vast lushness finally lost her drunkenness after struggling through the jungle. Having been talking non-stop during their trek through the jungle, the moment she quieted down, Gufei knew that she was sobering up. "You're sober," was his first line of words after mentioning Kung Fu before and the occasional warnings of tree. Vast lushness was feeling deeply embarrassed at the moment. She was considered as a smart person. Whenever a smart person got drunk, they would be aware that their drunken self would tend to leave an interesting impression to those around them. "Did I say anything?" Vast lushness was truly smarter than most people as she was even aware of her drunken habits. This was a question plenty of drunkards would avoid asking. "Not much." "You said some nonsense that I didn't bother listening to." Gufei was a smart person as well. He knew that drunken rambling should not be taken seriously. It was normal for people to unwittingly let slip thoughts that they would never utter when sober. It was not necessarily factual that drunken words would be truthful, as people tended to tell the biggest lies while drunk. Vast lushness, who was already a woman of few words, became more reticent at this moment. As a result, the two officially began a supposedly quiet journey together. "Here," Gufei suddenly said. Looking over, Vast lushness saw him holding out a pair of boots to her. "You should wear my shoes first to hasten our pace." He offered his boots to her. "Are your boots that great?" She did not hesitate to receive them from him. "It should at least be better than yours." Gufei was not spouting nonsense. He had been using appraisal along the way out of boredom that this seldom practiced skill of his managed to identify the traits of her cloth footwear. Whoa, these are indeed awesome. She was shocked when she saw the description for Windchaser's boots and curiously asked, "Where did you get them?" "It's a reward for consecutively completing 100 bounty mission." He did not hide this from her. "Oh?" Feeling stunned for a moment, she then remarked, "No wonder you keep on doing that." "Is it for these rewards?" Gufei never really explained his real reason for constantly doing bounty mission. He would simply inform others of how he got this sort of rewards. "Oh, I see." Vastlushness nodded her head before asking with a faint smile, "Do you want me to keep this a secret?" A majority of players would usually ask others to keep such conditions a secret whenever others learned of them. "Why? It's not a big deal." Gufei shrugged. She could naturally tell what his answer was going to be, otherwise, he would not reveal this piece of information to her in the first place. Replacing her footwear with his Windchaser's boots and taking 2 steps forward, she saw visible improvement in her movement speed. "Hey!" She suddenly heard him call out from behind her. She looked backward. "Lend me your footwear in exchange." Gufei smiled wryly. He was standing barefoot right now. "Whoops, sorry." She hurriedly tossed over her shoes to him. Vastlushness's shoes only had just the one trait that added a flat movement speed. The shoes' value was incomparable to the percentage increase traits for the all-agility build Gufei. He got the short end of the stick in this trade, yet his movement speed was still faster than her. Once more, the two resumed their journey and made great progress now that Vastlushness was no longer swaying about. He could feel his hope of making it for the 11 p.m. ferry schedule reignite. Reality was cruel, though. Just as the two made it to the pier, they saw a large passenger ferry slowly churned away from the shore. "Darn it!" She raised her middle finger in frustration at the ferry sailing away, finally showing a glimpse of her demonic demeanor that had once made her infamous in Y City. "I didn't make it on the ship." Gufei regretfully typed on the mercenary channel. "So we see," was young Master Han's reply. "Ah, where?" He for the traces of them around him. "On the ferry," young Master Han answered. Except for the departing ferry and Vastlushness's middle finger, Gufei did not catching any sign of movement from the ship. Now that he was carefully looking at it, he managed to see something by the stern of the ferry. Royal God Call had his arms open, imitating the iconic pose from Titanic, but was quickly dragged to the side by War Without Wounds, who then took his position to do the same. Gufei turned his gaze away and onto Vastlushness. "Alright, tell me where the designated log-off point here is." She was only aware of the log-off point's existence, but she did not know where it was exactly located. "Get off the deck and head west, it shouldn't be too far," a very familiar voice answered. "Thanks a lot," he said amid his shock. Someone was actually nearby, yet he failed to sense the person. It was rather mystifying. When he looked at where the sound had originated, he spotted a figure lazing on a bed of straw underneath a half shed by the pier. The arms of the person, whose face was covered by a straw hat, were folded behind the head to function as a pillow while they chewed on a piece of straw. Seeing the straw hat covering the face and recalling the voice he had heard moments ago, Gufei could already tell who the person was. He took 2 steps forward, drew his sword out, and swiftly flipped that straw hat, sending it flying into the air undamaged. "Hey, that's so rude." Ziziotion's hand shot out to catch her straw hat, but Gufei's blade was quicker. A quick twist of his wrist knocked that straw hat toward him. His left hand grabbed it midair and he playfully twirled it around his finger. "What are you doing here?" he asked while gripping his sword tightly and looking at his surroundings. Anywhere Ziziotion appeared would also be an area where danger was present. This was one of the things Gufei was certain about. "Relax. I'm just your average passerby," Ziziotion grumpily said, adding, "Return me my straw hat." "If no one is looking for you, why are you covering your face?" he asked. "It's a habit, okay?" she replied. "Is that so?" Gufei flicked his finger and sent that straw hat flying in the air. Ziziotion attempted to reach for it, but he raised his sword in hand and tidily delivered a couple of slashes, shredding the straw hat into a pile of straw that scattered over Ziziotion. That straw hat of hers was handcrafted and not any particular equipment, making it extremely easy for him to destroy it. "You!" She was so angry to the point of speechlessness. Gufei cared not for her anger as he calmly scanned the surroundings. He was certain someone would appear soon. Ziziotian would not go to such a place, otherwise. As Gufei thought of this, a player indeed hurried over to them and climbed up the deck noisily. Gufei was congratulating himself for his good judgment when the person arrived before them and happily asked, "Did you three miss the ferry service? How about trying my boat?"